I love the Joe Rogan podcast. It is a huge part of my day. I watch every episode. I watch usually some of it on the way to work. I watch a bunch of it while I'm at the gym. And if there's any left, I watch it on my way home from work. It gets me in a good mood most of the time. It helps me relax. I learn something and I just tend to feel better about myself after one. And I love it. And if you missed it, on August 28th, John Carmack, the CTO of Oculus, was on the podcast talking VR. And I'm not going to blow any smoke up anyone's butt here. It was flawless. It was amazing. It was exciting. John Carmack is a genius kid inside an adult body. Everything he said was full of joy and jubilation. He was ecstatic about talking about it, and you could see the pride and just honesty in everything he said. Not only that, but he was one of the most optimistic people ever. There are conversations that Joe brought up, which we'll get into, that could go south. They could be topics of negativity. They could be topics of concern. And Carmack just spun it each time in an optimistic, pleasant to listen to way. However, if you missed it, well, you may not have 2.5 hours to watch or listen to a podcast like this, and you may miss it. You may just never have the opportunity to hear everything about it, so I thought it'd be important to go over the highlights. I don't want to go over every highlight. There's too many to go over in the 2.5 hours of the video, but there are highlights related to VR specifically that I do want to go over and kind of how they came off and my thoughts about them. The full podcast link will be in the description along with timestamps of everything I'm talking about, which will go in chronological order, and I swear to God, the longer this podcast went on, the better and better it got. Every time something interesting came up, I did make a note, so every single point that I found interesting will be timestamped in the description for that full podcast. However, I won't be talking about all here because not all are even VR related, but if it was interesting, I made a note so you can skim through it to see if there's anything that you'd like to hear about. This video may go on longer than I intended, so I want to get started right away, going down the points in chronological order that he went over. These are the highlights of John Carmack's podcast with Joe Rogan that I found interesting. So right off the beginning, one of the first things that Joe Rogan said is he was talking about the Oculus Rift S or Oculus Rift, although he was holding an Oculus Quest. No problems there, it happens. But I will tell you one thing, Oculus Quest sales are going to soar from this episode. I was reading the comments and people already saying they didn't know about it and they've already gone to Amazon after this episode and bought it. So Oculus Quest sales are most likely going to raise because of this. It brings more awareness, more people into the VR scene. It was terrific and I'm very excited about that. On top of that, Carmack, right at the beginning, about a minute and a half in, came right out and said, VR is more than just gaming. And I respect that, and I'm glad he said it because it is. It's a lot more than just gaming. He says that anything that you could do on your phone, your TV, or any forms of entertainment used now, he wants that to be able to be done in VR. I think that is fantastic. It's exciting. And he kind of made me think, VR is not just about gaming because he brought up, say, small apartments in Japan or Tokyo. It can take a relatively small space that you have and make it feel large and endless, and that's exciting because you can just take the small things you have and open up your world. It's almost like economies of scale, but in another virtual reality, basically. It's very interesting to hear that, and that kind of set the tone for the podcast for me. I could not have been more excited at the 8-minute mark because I've said it the last 2 videos, so 3 videos in a row. We're talking about modding. He backs open source. He's always been open source the entire time. He's been coding and making games, but he is all about, he understands what modders bring. He understands what modding and allowing games to be modified brings. He understands that they bring longevity to the platform and they bring more playability, and they just allow people who enjoy a game to enjoy it even more. And what's wrong with that? That's the best part about gaming, is that we can find the things that we love and just play them even more in the ways that just keep making it fresh. And it's super awesome. I don't know, is that weird to say? Super awesome to see John Carmack say that. I knew he knew this, and I knew that he's preached it before, but to see him say it on a platform like the Joe Rogan podcast, putting it out there that he understands that things should be moddable and that we should be able to add to what we love, was fantastic to hear and a huge highlight. And we're not even 10 minutes into the podcast yet, and this is fantastic. At the 18-minute mark, they spoke real briefly on the esports scene. They got more into it later on, which we'll get into. But Carmack made the comparison that, the Super Bowl, the pinnacle of American sports, in reality is just a drop in the bucket compared to some of the scenes that the esports scene is gaining. And VR is bound to take that off, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. But they touched on that briefly very early on in the podcast. Right around the 26-minute mark is kind of how I pitch VR to my friends. Carmack says that sometimes, and by the way, Carmack apparently he's a huge Beat Saber fan. He's talked about Beat Saber a lot, so shout out to Beat Saber. Carmack loves it. And also he's into judo, and I would not want to be armbarred by him, apparently. That's his thing, so I'm not going to fight you, Carmack. You'll armbar me and it's going to hurt. But he was talking about how when he plays games, he's had moments where he's playing the game and then he gets out of the game, and whether it's dreaming, because they brought up dreams for a little bit, or just thinking about it, he'll find himself recollecting being there in the game. He was there. He doesn't remember playing the game, he remembers being there. So if he's on a mountaintop, he doesn't remember playing the game where he's on a mountaintop, he remembers being on a mountaintop. Now, he could be fluffing that up, who knows, but I don't think so. I believe that fully. And that's what VR is about. When I tell my friends I went to a VR chat world and explored, I don't remember gaming. I don't remember just climbing up the statue, up to the stars and looking down at the world. I don't remember playing that game and exploring that. I remember being there. I remember the feeling of climbing up and losing my grip a little bit for a second, where I jumped and misstepped and started falling. And for a second, my heart sank and I forgot that this was a game. It's about how it feels. VR is all about how it makes you feel, the immersion, the presence of you being in the game. And he nails it there. That's what it's about. That is what VR is about. I'm getting preachy here, so let's move right on. Around the 28-minute mark to mid-30s, they talked about safety in VR and how that's obviously a big point. Safety and motion sickness, all that in VR. They talked about how the eyes are relaying obviously what you're seeing in the virtual world to your brain, where your inner ear also has a lot of input it's sending. And when those two collide, when mixed signals are being sent, it's almost like poisoning your body almost. That's kind of the feeling of it, where you'll get sick. And they talked a lot about the chaperone system, a lot about the guardian system, about how they're trying to mitigate safety and fun at the same time. And one thing I actually learned from this, which I had no idea about, but it's the constant battle of the guardian system being present and showing on the screen, and obviously people not wanting that to happen as much. And he said that at one point they're working on the velocity. So for example, if your guardian system's set up here, and normally you start seeing it when you get about here, well, if you're here but swinging with a lot of velocity very fast, your guardian system may appear a little quicker because they don't want you to hit the wall. And it's thoughts like that, I'm like, that makes sense. Maybe why in Beat Saber I see the guardian system a little bit more than other games if I get a little too close. So I thought that was really interesting. I had no idea that that was something they were thinking about. And it's interesting to think about how they have to combat safety, fun, immersion. I'm sure a lawsuit nightmare, but it was interesting to see into the mind on how they battle that. They also touched base on the Facebook Reality Labs, which is basically the pinnacle pushing the amount a guardian system can do. They even brought up that they have the technology technically right now to do full 3D rendering of an area, where basically they can scope the entire area, render every object in it in 3D, where you can kind of walk around and interact. Obviously, the current gen technology cannot handle that, as well as price. It's basically, that's way down in the future, but it's very cool to see Facebook Labs already working on stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to when I can just strap on a headset, not have to worry about painting a guardian system. It scans my environment, scans my room, can even render that in 3D. That'd be cool. And it's just about the ease of use. It should be about building a world with, to me, as little hardware as possible. That's what it's about. Real quick, and I'm not going to bring this up much because I don't know a lot about AR, but it was interesting to see what he had to say about AR. In all honesty, I'm not going to take, you can interpret his words one way or another. He doesn't seem to be the biggest, I'm not going to say supporter is the wrong word, but he doesn't see AR being as beneficial, I think, as a lot of people do. Compared to VR, a lot of people say that AR is going to be the one that blows up first compared to VR. He seems to be completely on the other spectrum. I'm with him with VR over AR, but listen to the podcast for more about that. AR knowledge is not my specialty. I don't know anywhere near enough about it, so I don't want to get into it too much, but listen to the podcast for that. Around the hour mark is when they kind of really got into the origins of VR. Not really just the origins, but what Carmack saw in it. So he was talking about back in the day we're talking within a decade almost, where headsets would be the equivalent of the original Doom game graphics wise, but even blurry. So blurry original Doom, that's all you could see all the time. That's what the resolution was, and we're talking about a decade ago. He was talking about how a decade ago the Department of Defense was making virtual reality products for $150,000, something like that, where that was the resolution. That's what they looked like, the Doom scale like that. And he said to himself, that's not acceptable. We can do better. And that's kind of the start of this whole Carmack obsession with VR, according to him. And that was awesome to see a little bit of background in that, understand where he's coming from on, I like that attitude. We can do better. We can do better than that. And in a decade, look where we are. We have an all-in-one usable headset in the Oculus Quest by itself. And the resolution is pretty damn good for what it is. It's one heck of a journey. Around the hour and 11-minute mark, they did get into 5G technology pretty quick. Of course, there's a lot of, I think it's misinformation on what 5G can do to you. I'm not going to get into it, it's above my knowledge base, but he brought about 5G and how it has some elements of use for VR. It's not going to specifically impact the games because, well, like he said, a game like Beat Saber is not going to need the data transfer like that. But it may have an impact on streaming or cloud gaming, streaming it right to headsets. That way we can keep them entirely wireless. 5G could have a big impact on that, so they got into that a little bit. Around the 1:16-minute mark, I think it was somewhere around there. I'm kind of doing this from memory. They talked about VR, and this is the most optimistic part of it all. Joe hinted at, he was being very fair thinking the question, not targeting, but bringing up how there is the stereotype or negative stereotype that once we get into VR where it starts getting really good, that there's the trade-off of people using it too much and missing out on the real world. And Carmack had this amazing, just optimistic sense of, look, we are all different in our real world. Some people are rich off their mind. They have more money than they could ever spend in a lifetime. Their real life may be impossible to make better in a virtual world. However, and it's not to say people have bad lives, but some people do not have the means to go to another world. They don't have the motives to go to another world. They have other priorities. There's a lot of things that keep us in the world that we have right now. It doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but it limits us on the ability to explore what is out there. And VR can bring us to a new world and possibly to a better one than we have. And he firmly believes that whatever VR can provide should be better than the real world. And if it is, the trade-off is worth it. I see the pros and cons. I'm not sold entirely on it's not going to be a problem on people spending too much time in virtual reality possible to real life, but I'm not here to judge. Who am I? My life is better in VR a lot of times. It is better in real life a lot of times as well, but there are parts of my life that when I'm in VR, it is better. And I kind of understand where he's coming from. It's ultimately all about finding your tribe, as he said. It's all about tribe. I have a lot of military family, a lot of military friends. I hang around military basically majority of my day. And it's all about your tribe. And if you can find that in a VR world where you just cannot get that in real life, it's a net positive. It is good for mental health. It is good for well-being. It's good for purpose. And if you can find your purpose and tribe in VR, hats off to you. Get in there. That's what it's about. They did get into semi of a gaming topic between work-life balance, overworking, the gaming industry. Carmack admits, and we all know this, it's extremely hard to make a video game. It's extremely hard to make a video game that people have a good reception of and don't complain about 24/7 too, but they were talking about, the larger corporations where these young kids are overworked, underpaid, and just pushed. And in his mind, he understands there's trade-offs. He knows that he hasn't worked for that type of, field. He would never worked at a large studio like EA, but his mind, things like some of these large video games could not be created without sacrifice of time, mentality. The artist and the passion that they have can lead to products that just other business models would never ever be able to supply. So we get this amazing amount of art. VR gaming in general is art, and we get this art off the backs of work that may cause controversy, between overworking, underpaid, things like that, but it's a net positive. That's kind of what I took from the discussion. I see where he's coming from, and I will say that the model of gaming, if it was not what it is, I don't think we'd have a lot of the titles, a lot of things that we have. It takes passion and people putting all they have into it, whether that's the best for them at the time, that gets us products like we have. And it's something I'm gonna think about a lot. I don't even know if I'm articulating this part very well. I'm very on the fence, and it's a hard topic. But that's why I like podcasts like this. It makes me think. It makes me a better person. Normally, I would have probably just said, hey, go to work and get it done. That's what I do. I work 60 hours a week minimum on top of not even starting my YouTube stuff yet. So about 80 hours a week, I'm probably working on something. 80 to 90, not just hanging out doing what I want, but it's what I choose to do. It's my passion. So I understand where he's coming from, and it's something that I kind of battle between a work-life balance daily. I'll go on to the next. I'm done rambling on. Around the hour and 32-minute mark, they go over very quickly full immersion VR, or Joe, wanted to talk about treadmills, full gun stocks, things like that. And it was cool. I never actually thought about this. I always thought it would be pretty cool to see full immersion VR, like the treadmills, the gun stocks, like adding stuff. But Carmack thinks that it should be as minimal as possible. It should be about taking the headset, putting it on, and that's all you need. And he's right. I didn't think about it that way, honestly. I shouldn't have to add more hardware around me to experience another world, because at that point, I'm really not relocating myself anywhere. I'm just bringing it all to me. And that kind of defeats the purpose. So I kind of understand that, I'm with him now. I think that VR should be as minimal as possible. I don't need hardware all around me. I just need the unit to take me to that world the best way possible, with the most immersive it can, with just what it has. But if I have to keep adding peripherals, well, I'm not really taking myself to somewhere. I'm bringing that place to me. And that's the opposite of what VR should be. It should be about going some other place, not bringing it to you. They did go into VR and AR as well in the workforce or training, and I can see the value in that. And I've always thought of that. I've always thought about how I can interact with VR and AR at my work for training, because when you're training somebody, traditionally, there's a million distractions. They could be on their cell phone, they could be talking to people, they could be looking at things around. There are a lot of distractions, but when you put the headset on for training, it's right in their face. There is no distractions. They're there training, and they can't do anything else but what's provided to them in that world. So it's a huge benefit for training. I work in the automobile industry. I run a body shop. I would like to find a way to use AR glasses to identify broken parts, show them how to replace and repair them, where maybe they don't have to look it up on a computer as they're training and learning. They can just look through their glasses and get the instructions. There'll be a day where I try to incorporate VR more into my work and bring that to my corporate office, but that'll be a day and a discussion for later. They end the podcast basically talking about esports, going to how VR esports are going to be big in the future. I fully believe that location-based VR is going to be big as well, and of course time management, things like that. But I will say, to end this off, everything after an hour 50 in the podcast, so from an hour and 50 to about the 2.5 hour mark, Carmack is a kid. He talks about cars, technology, everything that interests him, and you can just, it's so much fun. If anything, yes, there's a lot to learn in the podcast before that, but from 150 to the end of it was the most joyous, best part of the podcast, because it is just him talking about what he loves, being excited, and honestly, I've never followed Carmack too heavily, but now I just need to keep listening to more, because this was one of the best Joe Rogan podcasts I've ever listened to. Let me know though, after you watched the podcast, what did you think about it? What were your takeaways down in the comments? Did you learn anything? Was this type of video with highlights helpful for you? I'm not entirely sure if it is, but I wanted to make it regardless and see what you guys thought. Please leave a like to support the video, subscribe and hit that bell icon to never miss an upload. I'm Eric for President, and I will see you next time, VR Space Cowboys.